Hello, everyone. It's Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. My name is Drew Sukup. On behalf of VMUG, I'd like to welcome you to today's Dell Technologies webcast, Integrate Your Virtualized Workloads with Performance at Scale, presented by Drew Tonnesen, Technical Staff at PowerMax Systems Engineering, and Tom O'Neill, PowerMax Product Management. Thank you for participating in today's webcast and for your continued support in the global VMUG program. Before we begin, I have 3 quick housekeeping items to go over. First, today's webcast will be recorded and available for you on demand. You'll receive an email sometime tomorrow at around 1 p.m. Central with the on-demand link, so keep an eye out for that. Second, we're going to have a Q&A session that follows today's presentation. All questions will need to be entered into the question and answer section on the side, but please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We have a great team headed by Rob. We love to answer questions throughout. Third, there will be a short online evaluation that pops up as you exit the webcast. Please take a minute and let us know what you thought of today's session and what you might like to see going forward. All attendees from today's webcast who opted in their information at registration will receive a $100 will be in a raffle to win a $100 Amazon gift card. With that, oh, and also the winner will be contacted directly by Dell Technologies, so good luck. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom now. Take it away, Tom.
Thanks, Drew. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom O'Neill from the PowerMax Product Management team. It's great to be here speaking to the VMUG. I've been through a lot of these myself, but I've never presented to it. I'm here with Drew Tonnesen, who is an expert on anything to do with PowerMax and VMware. Also in the background, we've got Rob Tasker from our technical evangelist team who's going to help answer questions. So feel free to go ahead and put them in the Q&A tab. And I've got Frank Nicolo and Taylor Mill from product marketing also helping us out with any questions or any comments that people have. So what we thought we would do, we don't really know how much this group knows about PowerMax. So I'm going to give you guys a quick overview of what PowerMax is and what it's all about. We're going to talk at a high level about the various integrations that we have with VMware. We'll get into some details with a couple of them. Really, we're going to spend most of the time on vVols. We'll go into a deep dive of what we support today on PowerMax, including a great demo that Drew's going to take us through later, and then we'll answer any questions as we go along. So just as a quick intro to PowerMax, for folks that don't know. So, PowerMax is a storage array. It's really the best storage array in the industry, high-end in particular. There's many aspects to it, but we think of it as very powerful. It's really meant to have the most intensive, demanding workloads that there are in the industry. Most of the world's most important data lives on a PowerMax. It's very simple. It's easy to operate, and it's trusted. I think people that put their data on a PowerMax know that we're going to protect it and keep it safe, regardless of what happens to the data center it's in or the application that's running. We are really the best at what we do. And just to give you an idea of that, basically the world runs on PowerMax and VMAX. So if all the VMAXs and the PowerMaxs in the world suddenly went away, there would be no transportation grid, because most of the major banks, all the major train services in the world would disappear. You wouldn't be able to use your credit card to buy anything from Amazon or anybody else because all the credit card processors use PowerMax. You wouldn't be able to swipe your ATM card at a bank because all the data is stored there. Most of the X-rays or anything medical that you've done would disappear. The world would really kind of shut down. And again, people rely on PowerMax to make sure your data is always there. Data is always there, always on. We can handle any kind of growth that customers have. Different industries, they have different growth patterns. The performance of the array is always predictable. No matter what we throw at it, we can, respond appropriately, and we do it at a great cost. So, we believe PowerMax is the best enterprise storage array, bar none. And I think not only does it perform, tremendously well, we can support 15 million IOPS, 350 gigs a second. These are all, big numbers. We obviously are huge performing in terms of what we can do, kind of IO coming in. It's also great in terms of, actual capacity density. We can stick essentially 4 petabytes effective on 2 floor tiles. the storage industry has really come a long way over the last 5-6 years. The one that's shown there is a PowerMax 2000. It's about the size of a microwave, roughly. It's not very big, but you can put a petabyte worth of data on there, and you can put a mix of any type of data that a customer has. It can be open system, it can be file, it can be mainframe, it can be, obviously VMware. Anything that people have, we can store on a PowerMax and do a great job protecting it, from whatever can happen to that data. And just real quick, there's 2 members to the family. We have our entry box, the PowerMax 2000. Again, it supports over a petabyte of capacity in a really small footprint. It's got high-end performance needs, and it's got a great set of software. The PowerMax 8000 is sort of our consolidation box. Customers that have petabytes of data and have multiple different types of data would leverage a PowerMax 8000. It's roughly the size of a refrigerator. You can have sort of one of those on 2 floor tiles and have a lot of capacity. We basically sell 2 different types of software packages. We sell what we call the Essentials, which has all of our, snapshotting, anything to do with data reduction, all of our migration capabilities, anything to do with performance, quality of service, all that stuff's included as sort of the default package. And then, our Pro package, which is, about 70% of what we sell goes out as a Pro package, provides other advanced capabilities like SRDF, which I'll talk about in a minute, data at rest encryption, which a lot of customers use. ENAS is our file solution. ICDM Advanced, which is also called AppSync, that's sort of a snapshot management product. PowerPath is provided for multipathing, and then we also have host native encryption now that end-to-end encryption that we support on the box. So we have solutions to solve any customer needs, and do it at the best possible price. And then finally, the biggest, probably the most important technology that we support on PowerMax is SRDF. So, SRDF is really sort of what made, what was, Symmetrix back in the day, then VMAX, PowerMax. It's a replication, disaster recovery solution. Started out as sync, so it's, within, roughly 50, 60 miles that you would replicate, where you have the exact same, the same set of data on both boxes, such that if you lose, your primary array for whatever reason, you could just pick it up from the secondary array and go with 0 data loss. It's high performance. It scales. Lots and lots of customers use this. We have async if you need to go, farther than 50, 60 miles. You can really go any distance, where you'll be able to copy data from a source box to a target box. That could be in New York and London, or New York and Singapore. It doesn't really matter. So it's extended distance. It also, again, it protects against any issue you'd have with the primary storage array. If you lost it for whatever reason, you'd be able to recover on the other side. And then the most recent one that we introduced is SRDF Metro, which is an active-active sort of HA solution. Obviously it's going to be sync distances. It's become very, very popular with our customer base. It lets us do sort of automatic failover and failback between a source and a target, depending on the state of the, if you lose links between, say, the server and the primary storage array, you just pick it up from the secondary array. All of these things can be put into 2, 3, and 4 site replication scenarios, depending on how sort of paranoid a customer is about it. And we have customers that really are super paranoid and will do whatever they need to do to make sure that they protect their customers' data. If you're running a bank, you need to make sure that if you swipe your ATM card, that it gets captured and that it doesn't get lost, no matter what happens. So that's really what SRDF is all about. We sort of bringing this up because we're adding support for SRDF async into our vVols solution that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So let's talk quickly about some of the areas that we have for integration between VMware and PowerMax. There's really a big long laundry list of items that we support. I'm only going to really sort of touch a couple of them, and the ones that are in italics we're going to sort of touch on during this presentation. But we support, a whole bunch of different API integrations, both VAI and VASO. Those have been out for, many of these have been out for many, many years. We support vVols. We'll talk more about that. Unisphere, which is our element manager for PowerMax, has an integration with VMware to make it easy to view sort of the VMware environment from sort of the storage admin side of the house. There's the VSI plugins. There's a thing called Enterprise Storage Analytics, which plugs into vRealize Operations Manager that people use. There's support with Cloud Foundation and Tanzu. I'll get into in a couple of minutes. We have Ansible modules. There's CSI drivers, and then we've supported SRM through our storage resource adapter, replication adapter for many years. That integrates SRDF with VMware, and it's really an orchestration tool to help make it easy in the event that an application needs to be recovered somewhere. It makes it easy to do the recovery. So there's a pretty long list. We have most of our ESX customer base uses most of these technologies, if not all of them. But these things have pretty large install bases typically, and have been used for quite some time. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them before we get to vVols. One of them is we put out a release fairly recently, adding new support for a new storage resource adapter for SRM. Again, it's an adapter that lets SRM interact with PowerMax. It supports 2 and 3 site configs, except for 3-site Metro. We have a thing called SRDF Smart DR. Metro Smart DR, which is sort of a 3-site, it's an HA with a async leg off of that. That's not supported. Most of our other 2 and 3-site configs with sync and async are supported. It's possible to migrate to this new version if you want, using some VMware steps, and it's an appliance-based model that makes it simple. Again, most of the customers that are VMware customers and PowerMax customers tend to use an SRA to do their orchestration for their DR. We have a pretty large install base of that customer base. Another thing that we worked with VMware on was adding support for NVMe Fabric on PowerMax with the 7.0 release of ESX, which came out, I think it was Q2 of last year. We actually released FCNVMe support before VMware did, but we worked with them to help get their support out. We support SRDF sync and async. We support it on PowerMax arrays. In terms of VMware, it's supported in really for us vSphere 7.0 U1. There is no vVol support yet. We're working with VMware on that. That'll come out in the future. Or RDM. In terms of fabrics, you want to make sure you have at least Gen 5, but Gen 6 is probably better. And then, last thing just we're going to touch on before we get into the vVols discussion is VMware Cloud Foundation. So really what you can use this with PowerMax is we can use PowerMax as primary or secondary storage for VCF with vVols. I think this audience probably knows that, vVols are sort of the stated direction for VMware moving forward. That's where they're putting a lot of their investment. You can use that with vVols on PowerMax. So we're going to spend the rest of the time, next roughly 25 or so minutes on vVols. As we get started there, we have a poll I'd like you guys to answer so we know how deep to go on this. So how much knowledge does this audience have of vVols? 4 questions. I'm very knowledgeable on vVols. I have some knowledge, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert. Maybe I know a little bit, but not really that much, or really I don't know really much of anything at all. So if you could just take a minute and answer this poll, that'll help us understand how deep we need to go in terms of what vVols are.
And a reminder to our audience, this is a live poll, so please feel free on answering it, and it looks like we're getting some answers coming in. So yeah, keep pressing them.
So Drew, I don't see anything on my side.
So if you press view results on the bottom.
Oh, okay, I got you. Okay.
Go. And then if you keep pressing refresh results.
Okay. I'm going to give this 30 more seconds, and then I'll push the results to the audience. And thank you for doing this. This is helpful. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and publish this to the audience because I think this is probably be relevant regardless of whether everybody's had a chance to respond or not. You know, so actually this is kind of what we hear when I do this question with really sort of storage admin types. We do get very few people who are knowledgeable, say that they're very knowledgeable. Most people are in the sort of middle two buckets, which is sort of what's on here. And then there's, some people that don't know much. So let me get into vVols. I apologize to the people who are really, really knowledgeable. We might touch on a few things here that we just so that the group can catch up. So we're adding support for we've added support for replication with vVols with our SRDF ACE solution. We did this in the second half of last year. Again, going along with PowerMax itself, we think it's pretty simple. We're going to show a demo on how you set it up and how you use it, but as a VMware user, it's really an easy thing to use. Again, you get all the power of SRDF when you use this. So in the event that your primary site has an issue, you'll be able to recover from your secondary site. And then, it's very scalable. We can support up to 64,000 vVols on a PowerMax. One thing for this group to know if you're not that knowledgeable, there's not a one-to-one mapping between VMs and vVols. So every VM has at least 3 different types of vVols, and most of them have 4. So essentially, you have a config vVol, which there's one of. You have a swap vVol for every VM, which there's one of. You have the data vVols, which there's typically multiples of. We tend to see anywhere from 3 to 5 to even higher than that per VM. And then there's memory vVols, which are snapshots. So if you have a fairly simple example where you have a VM with say 8 data vVols, right there you've got 10 vVols for every VM. And if you make copies of it, if you make say 6 copies of it, you're up to 60 or so vVols per VM. So there's not a one-to-one mapping. That's just one thing to sort of keep in mind. So scalability really matters when it comes to the number of vVols and a storage array can support. Again, really what this does is it helps combine the gold standard in replication, which is SRDF, with sort of VMware's stated, moving forward plan or strategy, which is really the VMware vVols support. It's a really nice solution that we have. It makes it easy. We're integrated with SRM. Now, one nice thing about using SRM with vVols is that there's no need for an SRA, these plugins that we used to have. All the commands are built right into VASO, so it's all built right in. We've done a lot of work with that team to do this support, and I think if folks are using vVols with PowerMax, we would highly recommend that you also use SRM, given that how much effort we've put in with that team to make sure it all works. With vVols, you can use SPPM to do the automated provisioning, replication management. It really makes it. The idea is that you can put a set of features and a set of capacities into a thing called a container that the storage team puts together. They sort of hand it over to the VMware team, and the VMware team can take advantage of whatever features and capacities in that container. In the event that you need more capacity in a container, it's really simple for the storage admin to add more capacity and let the VMware admin go. But it makes the handoff pretty simple between the two teams. And then in terms of our support with SRDF, the remote replication, it's really easy to move a virtual machine with all the different pieces that need to go along with it, so that it's all resident on the remote side, the target array, in the event that there's a disaster. And then there's a couple more things I just want to mention here that we haven't mentioned. There's a thing called a VASO Provider for the folks that aren't that knowledgeable in vVols. Basically, what the VASO Provider is it's built by the array team. It sort of sits between vSphere and the array, and really what it does is it translates requests from the vSphere admin to the array. Like, make me a snapshot of that virtual machine. The VASO Provider is what sort of does the translation between the vSphere command and the array command to take the action. The VASO providers in the industry can either be external, meaning runs outside the array, or they can be embedded. We recently embedded ours onto PowerMax in that release we put out recently. There's really sort of two things. One, it makes deployment really simple because it gets shipped with the box. And two, there's multiple copies so that you have HA in the event it goes down for some reason. Again, I mentioned the fact that we're the most scalable solution in the industry. We support up to 64,000 per single array. There's a thing called a protocol endpoint. That's really the data path layer. So what it does is it's where all the I/O flows through. All the different arrays in the industry have implemented it differently. Some people put it right on the array, and there's like one for the whole array. Others do it by cluster. On PowerMax, we have one protocol endpoint for every physical ESX host that's out there. So if you've got 128 hosts out there that are attached to a PowerMax, we'd have 128 protocol endpoints. You can run this environment either a fiber channel or an iSCSI environment. It's up to whatever you're running. And then we have complete support for the VMware ecosystem that supports vVols. There's a list here. You can always check the compatibility guide to see what things are supported. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Drew. He's going to get in a little more deeper dive detail.
Thanks, Tom. So yeah, I'm going to go through a few different slides here with a little bit more detail around the virtual volumes, VASO 3 and replication. And then I'm going to have a demo which walks through a setup configuration, which includes Site Recovery Manager. I could do that in slides. I decided to do it in a demo because I think demos are more interesting to watch than slideware. So a few things about VASO 3 and vVol replications. vVol are all driven by, as Tom said, SPBM, right? Storage-based policy management. Within a vCenter, you have the ability to go in and create a policy that has a number of different characteristics, right? So those characteristics can be based on, let's say, tags. You can create a tag and you can tag a data store and create a policy based on that if you want certain data stores to come through. For vVols, the way it works is you create a policy based on the capabilities that the array has. So an array can advertise capabilities it has down to the vCenter for vVols. For instance, if you have the ability to do QoS like we do, quality of service, you would advertise that down. If you could take snapshots on the back end, you might advertise that down, things like that. If you can do replication, advertise that down. And then you create a policy, and when you create a virtual machine, you assign the virtual machine to the policy, so it gets whatever is associated with that policy. In our case, I'll show you the quality of service. There's a concept in vVols of a fault domain when it comes to replication. You can think of a fault domain just as an array, or think of it like a SRM recovery site, right? Basically, a fault domain is an array that has your setup in it. And when you're running vVol replication, you have the ability to do a fan in, a fan out. And that means that if I have, let's say I have two virtual machines in a protected vCenter, and I have two other arrays available to me, I could have one virtual machine replicate to one array. I could have one virtual machine replicate to another array. But VMware still controls SRM capabilities, right? So SRM is a two-site solution. You can only go from one to the other. So you can't take a single virtual machine and replicate it to two different sites. VMware doesn't support that. Okay. Container service levels. Service levels are what we call in the PowerMax the quality of service. So we give you the ability to set up different service levels, which are represented by metals and gems, diamond, platinum, gold, silver. They each of those characteristics are associated with a response time. And so if you're a vendor who provides storage to other customers, they might buy their storage based on what type of performance you can provide. And that's what our service levels do. Consistency, the consistency that we have is SRDFA. We actually bundle changes, and we send over changes on a regular cadence to the other side to maintain consistency. When that is initially set up with a virtual machine, the virtual machine remains in a state of a non-consistency, which is also non-compliance, until the replication is synced up between the devices. They fully replicated. And then you'll notice that the compliancy will change to green, right? I'll show that in the demo too so you can see. So initially when you set up a virtual machine for replication, it, depending on how large the devices are, may take a little time to come into compliance. And finally, our solution is fixed from an RPO of 5 minutes. So you can't get any better than 5 minutes in terms of failing over. However, depending on when you fail over, if there were a particular disaster, you might be using a snapshot that is a little bit younger than 300 seconds, right? We actually can go down to like 15 seconds or so. It just depends, but you have no control over it. So when we talk about planning, plan that an RPO would be 300 seconds. So a little bit of detail about kind of the nuts and bolts of how it works on the back end. We replicate the devices. So as Tom was saying, for those who aren't familiar with vVols, vVols are a one-to-one relationship with the VMDKs. So when I create a VMDK in a VMware environment without vVols, if I'm using VMFS, let's say, that VMDK is just a file that lives on a file system, right? And it lives on a single device. With vVols, that VMDK is actually its own device on the back end. So you have a one-to-one mapping of a VMDK to a what we call a thin device on the back end. Of course, each virtual machine, as Tom said, has multiple devices associated with it. So it's a one-to-many relationship, but the VMDK will always be its own virtual thin device on the back end. Okay. We strongly recommend using SRM for replication. You actually can use PowerCLI. I haven't seen many customers interested in doing that, but you can. The commandlets are there to do that, but there are some capabilities that don't quite work the same way, so we definitely don't recommend using it for your production solution. And as Tom mentioned too, there's no storage replication adapter that is required for vVols. Everything is done through VASO. As far as testing is concerned, within SRM, we control all that through VASO. So anybody who might be familiar with the VMAX or the PowerMax and using an SRA where you have to create devices or tell the SRA to create devices, VASO does all that for you. So VASO will create all the snapshots and the extra devices you need whenever you run tests, so you don't have to worry about it. So here's a high-level look at what the architecture is for the environment. So here I'm showing a protection site on the left and a recovery site on the right. Up top, you can view that as kind of the VMware components, right? So Site Recovery Manager would be part of that. The appliance up there with your vCenter, all right? And then on the bottom, you have the PowerMax on either side. Embedded in the PowerMax is the VASO provider, so you have a total of 4 here. Each PowerMax has 2 VASO providers, right? One remains as active and one remains as standby, right? And they can switch, if there's a failure or anything, and take over the other one. An important thing to remember about the VASO provider is that it's in the control path. You can see that arrow there where it says control path. What that means is the provider is necessary to do any type of management activity. So if I have to start up or shut down a virtual machine, if I have to add a device to a virtual machine, that requires the VASO provider. If my VASO providers failed, in the unlikely event they both failed in this HA architecture, if I have virtual machines running, those virtual machines are not impacted for I/O because I/O goes through the data path, which is this protocol endpoint little device in the middle there. So you don't have to worry about losing your VASO provider, and then having your entire environment crash. You will continue to do I/O without any issue in the existing environment. But if you need to shut down the virtual machine or add a disk, you're going to have to get the VASO provider back up. Okay. The representations on the PowerMax in the bottom there, where you see diamond, gold, bronze, those are the service levels I was talking about. That's our quality of service, how we provide that. And so when you create a virtual volume, you're doing that through storage policy-based management, and that storage policy-based management is going to be mapped to one of these capabilities, diamond, gold, bronze, whatever. Although the picture here shows equivalency on the left and on the right in terms of the service levels, that is not a requirement for Site Recovery Manager or for replication. So you can freely replicate from one service level on the left to one on the right of different types. I can go from diamond to gold or from bronze to gold. It doesn't matter. And I actually will show you that in the demo in case your recovery site, many customers will run the recovery site not at the same power as the protection site. And so I'll show you how that's done. And then on the bottom, you can see we have these groups. We replicate at the group level. It's called a replication group, which is the same thing that VMware calls it. And the replication group is what holds the devices. And a replication group is going to be how SRM is set up also. So Site Recovery Manager is all based on the replication group, and that's where the consistency comes in. Okay. There's bidirectional, so you can see I have these designations called R1, R2. That just means for us active and passive. So, and I have an R1 on the left, I have an R2 on the right, and then vice versa. So as you know, SRM is a bidirectional solution, so we support that with vVols if you want to do that. And finally, just some of the SRM capabilities here. Fully supported, protect, test, failover, plan migration. Everything is done, as I mentioned, at the replication level, and I'll show you how a replication group is created and then used as that for the protection group. Test failover and failover is going to be, again, controlled by the VASO provider. It's going to do everything it needs to do. One thing I point out here is if you're familiar with older version of VASO, VASO 1, it had this thing called a capability set, which meant that it could understand what's being advertised by the array. That's no longer a feature. They took that out, VMware and VASO 3 provider. So that just means that if I'm presenting storage, my VMware admin, and I'm the storage admin, has no idea what I'm providing, you know, in terms of storage. So if I've set up a diamond service level, all my VMware admin is going to see is the storage available. So there has to be some communication there. And the last thing is about reprotect. Because of the implementation that VMware has, and by the way, all vendors follow the same spec. We all use the same APIs to create a vVol implementation. When we do a reprotect, we actually have to recreate the relationship between the devices. So it's a net new operation. So the failover is very quick, but if you're going to run a reprotect, which is basically resetting up SRM to go the other direction, it's a net new operation, just takes a little more time. So we're going to go and do the demo now. A couple of things I just kind of want to set the stage here so that you know what I've done ahead of time, so hopefully it's not confusing. What I have set up here is I have 2 vCenters. They each have 2 ESX hosts. Those have been zoned to my arrays on either side, and I have presented that small protocol endpoint device down to each of the ESX hosts so that they're ready to use vVols. I also have set up SRM on each site, so that's also configured with the vCenters, so they're ready to go. So I have the bones of what's there. What the demo is going to do is I'm going to walk through creating what's called a storage container. The storage container is the object that is on the array, and that's where you put storage to make it available to the VMware environment. And I'll show you how to create that replication group, which gets associated with that container of storage. Then we'll go into the vCenter side, and we'll create data stores so that you can see how the containers are read by VMware. And we'll create the storage policy and how to associate that with the different service level. and then we'll create a virtual machine and configure SRM for a test failover, right? The nice thing about this is it will go through basically these steps on each side. So if you miss one side, just hang on. I do it on the other side. So I do each step on the protection and the recovery side, just so you can follow through. The demo is about 9 minutes or so. So my two arrays here are 355 and 450. This is what our Unisphere environment looks like. We have a dashboard for vVols here. And we're going to create this storage container. The storage container is just a logical construct. If you know Oracle, for instance, this is like a table space. And I'm going to put some data files in it, and these data files will be the service levels. So I'm going to decide how much storage is presented. In the PowerMax world, we generally see a VMware administrator and the storage administrator. So this is where the storage administrator controls how much storage is available to the VMware administrator. So I'm going to choose a service level here, Platinum, and give it some terabyte of data. And I can give as many of these service levels as I have in this single container. We support 16 containers. Most customers only use a couple, usually like one for production, one for development test. And so we'll run this, and this will create my container of 6 terabytes with Platinum service level and a Bronze service level. And now we'll jump over to the other array, 450, and we'll do the same thing, but on the other side. Now this, remember, this is my recovery site. So what I've decided on this site is that I don't need to run it as well, because I'm just going to use it for recovery. I don't want to use the high-end service levels. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do optimized. So I'm just going to create a large bucket of optimized storage on this side. So we'll come back now. Here's our protection site. We're going to create a relationship between the two containers so that we can replicate between them. We use SRDFA, as we've talked about. The mechanisms by which we replicate for vVols is the same. It's SRDFA. We use replication groups. There's nothing different. So we're not doing anything different on the back end. All I'm essentially doing here is creating a regular replication group between two arrays, except I'm associating them with vVol containers. We call them VASO replication group. VMware just calls them replication groups. Okay, so now we have the relationship between the two arrays. We're going to go out, and I'll show you here. We have the providers already registered. We have both of them, so we have one primary and one standby, so active and standby. With the VASO provider registered and our protocol endpoint, we can go in and create the data store. So there's this, if you haven't seen this yet, there's a vVol button there, and it's going to advertise to me any containers I have in the array. I actually have more than one. I'm going to grab that container, and I'm going to mount it. This is, if you use NFS, this is probably familiar to you, where you're going to mount it to multiple hosts. And basically, it's just creating the relationship between the two. VMware decided to use a data store because it just, from a customer standpoint and an ease of use, it made more sense, even though the concept is different. You know, there's no file system or anything. It makes it easier to use since this is what most customers are used to already. And so here's the recovery site. Same thing. I'm just going and grabbing that container I created, and I'm going to mount that. And now I have both data stores available on each side. So now here we get into the storage policy-based management, right? This is where we're going to go in and set up our QoS and our replication so that when we create a virtual machine, we're able to assign it those qualities. Okay. So here I'm going to use Platinum on this side for my QoS. I'm going to enable the rules for the VASO provider. QoS is called Performance Index, and I'm going to grab my Platinum one. And then we go to the Replication tab. Now the replication is always done custom. Nothing here can change because it's only asynchronous and a 300 RPO. If you had another array, you might have multiple ones listed in the fault domain. But you can see here I have one data store that adheres to the rules I've set up, to the policy. So if we look at the storage compatibility, we'll see that I just have that one data store that's compatible. Now we'll similarly do the same thing on the other side. So we're going to create a policy over here. Always important to have a policy on both sides, because when we go into Site Recovery Manager, for those who use that technology, you have to create mappings for network and folder and things like that. You also have to create mappings for policy-based management. So I have to tell VMware the relationship between where I have my vVols in my protection site and where I want them in my recovery site. So here I'm creating one for optimize, right? Because that's all I have. And I actually have two compatible data stores here, because optimize is what I use in my recovery site. And so now we'll create a virtual machine. If you've never used storage policy-based management, you'll be familiar with where the drop-down is here in the next screen. Usually, if you don't use it, use the default. But if I select my policy here, it'll tell me what's compatible, which is the data store I've created. Okay. Here's the replication group, which gets auto-filled for me to VMUG. If I had multiple ones there, it would allow me to just pick which one I want. And just continue to go through the wizard. It'll go through and create the virtual machine for me based on that policy I've given it. Now, I haven't set up anything from replication here. You can see we're non-compliant. That's because on the back end, we're actually replicating the devices. So if I click this check policy compliance, it will go through and check if they're synchronized. In this case, they've synchronized, and so it comes back as compliant. So let's jump over to Site Recovery Manager. And this is, I think this is version 8.4 I have installed. So first thing we want to do is set up the mapping I talked about. So we want to tell SRM that our platinum policy on the left is going to be mapped to our optimized on the right. So we'll grab platinum and then we'll grab optimized. We'll tell them to create a relationship between them and then reverse that replication for the other side. We don't have to set up any managers, any array managers. If you're familiar, we can go right to protection group. So in our protection group here, everything will be based on the replication group. So I'm going to choose virtual volumes as my type and my fault domain there. And here you can see I'm going to choose the VMUG replication group. Okay, so any VMs that are in that are going to be associated with this plan. And we just have the one, but if you had multiple ones. The other thing with SRM, starting with 8.3, is that as you add more virtual machines to your replication group, they get automatically added to your protection group. You don't have to go in and reconfigure. So here's my recovery plan, just has a single virtual machine, and we're just going to run a test. So when I run a test, what's going to happen is the array is going to talk to the VASO provider. On the array, we're going to go and we're going to mount a snapshot, a copy of the vVols, and we're going to make them available to the recovery site so that you can run all your tests. Same as you're used to if you use SRM, there's no difference here. We're just using the VASO provider as opposed to using the storage replication adapter. So my test is complete. If we come over to the recovery site, I think, here we go. We can actually look at the VM that's running, and you can see it's in the recovery vVol data store, right? So that's our optimized data store we created. And then cleanup, we just run the cleanup, which is really quick. Goes through, it'll unlink our snapshots, delete them, and we're good to go. So really straightforward, you know, VMware really trying to make this easy for customers to navigate, considering it's a whole new storage paradigm. But you can see it doesn't really, even for those of you who don't know vVols very well yet, it's fairly straightforward, walking through the steps. pop on. I think Tom's got another poll here he would like you to take.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Drew. That was a really great demo. Actually, folks, we're just about done. We got a couple questions, and we'll get a little wrap up, and then we'll take any questions that you have. First question is, what are folks' plans to adopt vVols? I'd like to know, one, are you using them today on either a PowerMax or a VMAX? Are you using them on some other Dell EMC array? Are you using them on a non-Dell EMC array? You plan to start looking at them in the next year or so? You're going to look at them farther out, or you really have no plans at all? So if you could just take a minute and answer that question, that'd be great.
Yes, and a reminder to our audience, this is a live poll, and for anyone that wasn't here earlier when we had one of these earlier, this is a live poll, so please feel free to answer. We're getting a lot of answers coming in right now.
We'll give it like 15 more seconds. We'll show the results, and then we'll go to the last poll, and then we're just about there. We'll provide some place to get more information. I mean, we can view the results. I think, Drew, you got to hit that view results.
Yeah, you want me to publish?
Yeah, you can show it. We'll see what they had to say.
There we go. Oh, I guess I got to keep pushing it if they keep answering. Okay.
All right, and I think we've got one more poll, and then
yep. So most
the
plan to look at them in the future.
For the folks that are either using vVols or haven't thought about or looking to use vVols, what do you need to help increase the adoption? And this is more just a free flow. Is there a feature? Is there a whatever that you would think you would need to help increase your adoption of vVols? It just helps us with our prioritization and working with VMware when you can answer this question.
And again, to our audience, this text field right here underneath the question in the presentation window is live, so feel free to answer the question in whichever detail you would, how much detail you would like to give is up to you.
And then just as a reminder, if folks want to type in questions in the Q&A, we'll answer them. I think there were a couple around SRM. I don't know, Drew, do you understand the question, Drew?
So let me see. So the question is around fault tolerance, virtual machines not compatible with storage policies, or the vVols, right? So yeah, no, it wouldn't work. So the storage policies are absolutely required if you want to do replication with SRM and vVols. So the question was, can I do fault tolerant VMs without storage policies because they're not supported with SRM? You can't. No.
All right, folks. I guess why don't we just, rather than publish these results, why don't we just go to the end, Drew, the next slide?
Yeah, I actually don't think I can publish them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can. So why don't you just...
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say you can't publish those results, unfortunately.
It's more for our knowledge anyway. So just if folks want to know more, Drew has a great blog. I've got it listed on here. If you just type in Drew Tonnesen and you Google him, you can actually get this. But if you put this in, what I get listed here, and put vVols in, you'll get all the information he's got about vVols. Again, there's information here about anything to do with PowerMax and VMware. There's probably literally hundreds of entries in there. It's a great place to go to get more information. And even if you just want to get a feel how vVols work, as Drew mentioned, to a large extent, given that we're all using the same spec, they kind of work the same for most vendors, or at least similarly for most vendors. So this is a great place to go to get more information. And then if you want to know what's supported, what does VMware claim is supported, you can go to the compatibility guide, which is on here. You can type in vVols, and you can type in all sorts of different features. It will tell you what, who is and who isn't supported. So I think with that, unless there's more questions, I think we want to thank everyone for taking the time to hear our presentation. It's fun being on this side of the call, on VMUG call. I said I've been through quite a few, but it's nice to present to you guys. So thanks for the time. Hope everybody has a great rest of your day. And Have a good one, and we'll answer. I think there might be more questions I see coming in. Let me just look real quick. Okay, I think right now the question will answer. We'll hang out for another minute or two in case there's questions. And with that, thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Let's wait a little bit just to see if any other questions come in. But in the meantime, Drew, do you have any last things to say?
I did see one question, I'm sure Rob answered it. There was a question around the what type of management can you do? This is actually non-vVol related. What type of management can you do with VMware inside of the vCenter? And if you use my blog, the Virtual Storage Integrator, VSI, if you search for that, that's where you can do the most capability from within the vCenter. We have integration in Unisphere on the management side from the array, and then there's the different softwares that we have, like vRealize Orchestration we have a plugin for. We're going to have a plugin for Veeam soon. We have a plugin for VROPS if you want to go that direction. But VSI is what we use from a vCenter standpoint. And it allows you to do things like look at the back-end storage, do some best practices. It allows you to provision storage, take snapshots, things like that.
Great. And the only question that really came in wasn't a question. It was a fan of your blog, Drew. So there are a lot of thank yous from our audience. And, with that, if it's okay with everyone presenting, I think maybe we should, oh, never mind. We got a question that came in.
So we have a question around vVols does it give you performance improvement in SQL Server application? This is funny. So we've kind of had questions around general vVol performance, and it kind of mirrors the old questions around are RDMs better than VMFS when it comes to performance, and VMware's kind of put that one to bed. I wouldn't say there's any definitive benefit in terms of performance right off the top. There's definitely going to be corner cases for both RDMs and vVols. Because there's no stack, in terms of the file system, you'll hear some people say maybe vVols are a little bit better, but then the same argument can be made for RDMs. I would say nothing significant. So I wouldn't say go to vVols because you're looking for better performance in MS SQL. I would say go to vVols because that's where VMware's going instead.
All right, great. With that, I don't see any more questions coming in. So again, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Drew, for taking the time to speak with us today. And of course, our whole team in the back end, making sure we answered all the questions coming in. Big thank you to everyone to make this all come together. As a reminder to our audience, you will receive a follow-up email with the on-demand link from today's webcast and all the other on-demand webcasts that we've had over the last 6 months. So keep an eye on your email for tomorrow, 1 p.m. Central Time. That should be coming in. To find out more about the VMUG webcast program, visit vmug.com and check out the education page. Please make sure to complete the short online evaluation that will pop up as you exit this webcast and let us know how today's session went. From all of us here at VMUG, thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Drew. Hey, Drew, are you still on?
Yes, I'm just about to end the webcast.
No problem. So when will we actually get to see the results